There are 5 tactics that will help you overcome procrastination forever. So today we're going to talk about an accountability system, reinforcements, righteous indignation, habit stacking, and what I like to call the announcement. And we'll also discuss what makes us procrastinate in the first place, so that way we can attack the problem at its source. So let's get after it. So first of all, why do we even procrastinate? 2 reasons really. At the risk of stating the obvious, procrastination is an avoidance technique. It actually falls under a larger group of tactics called escapism, where we're simply trying to avoid an unpleasant thing. This most often comes down to actually just our perception, when we see something that we need to do or should do as unpleasant. And this immediate discomfort creates a source of friction that makes it harder for us to do the things that we know that are good for us in the long run. And if you add enough friction or weight of that mental disturbance into your life, it can actually start to feel like an impossible quest rather than some minor inconvenience. And the second reason has to do with how we evolved as humans, because way back when humans lived in tribes and provided for themselves by hunting for food and gathering what was available to them, food was actually a very precious and limited resource. And since food sources could be unpredictable, the tribe's survival was dependent on getting as much done as possible while minimizing risk and the energy used. And that was just how things were for ages of the human existence. And it was really only the rich and the powerful that had the excess means that could really afford as much food as they wanted, which is why back in the dark ages, being fat was actually a huge flex on people. But obviously things have changed quite a bit since then, because now power and success is not about how much you hoard or consume. It's actually measured by how much you can do and the value of those things that you do. But our brain's evolution has not caught up with today's societal expectations. So the fact that you want to wait to see if you actually need to do something is actually a sign that you have a productive human brain. It's really not a bad thing. It's just the way you're hardwired. But we need to catch up with today's society and reprogram our minds to be able to actually produce at a high level if we really want to be seen as successful or valuable in today's society. So an oversimplification for curing procrastination actually comes down to 2 things: creating more power to get things done and reducing the weight or the friction of doing that thing. So first, let's talk about creating more power to get the thing done. And this is where those 5 steps that I mentioned at the top of the video come in. That first one is obviously accountability. Sometimes I also refer to this as community, because humans are social. We have a need to belong, and we want to be accepted by people who match our ideals. And we can actually use this to our advantage by asking those people to be our accountability partner. So is there someone in your life that you trust, respect, or admire that you would be willing to ask to be your accountability partner? This could be a friend, family member, or even a mentor. One of the things that actually sets apart a lot of high performers is they have designated groups of people to report to. This is sometimes done informally, like with those friend groups, but there are also several great professional organizations and masterminds that have memberships based around this central concept of accountability. I've actually used this to great effect. It was one of the very first investments that I ever made in myself, was to be part of a mastermind that was focused on helping each member reach their first $1 million in their net worth. And we meet every single week and hold each other accountable for our expenditures, investments, and goals that we're trying to accomplish in our professional lives as we make the climb to our first $1 million in net worth. And that has been a life-changing experience for me. Knowing that I have a few guys in my corner who share the same goal, have similar values, and who will both call me on my crap, but also recognize me when I've done something worthwhile, has been one of the greatest investments I've ever made in myself. And it's also a ton of fun to be a part of their journey as well. Now, the second tactic of reinforcement goes super well with the first of community, because with reinforcement, you always want to have consequences for things that matter, both good and bad consequences. And this can be really leveraged by an accountability group too, because they can also hold you accountable for the work that's being done and make sure that the reinforcement is taking place. So for example, one of the group members in our accountability group, let's say his name is Mike. Mike had a goal of working out 5 times a week for a minimum of 30 minutes each time. And as a reward, if he hit his goal, he would be allowed to take himself and his wife out for a steak dinner to one of his favorite restaurants. However, if he failed to hit his his goal, he would have to actually leave some money behind on a random person's windshield. Now, at first, what we didn't realize as a group was that we needed to make sure that both reward and the punishment were strong enough to complete the incentive. While he didn't really like the idea of leaving 20 bucks behind on a random person's windshield, it wasn't really enough to stop him from justifying on missing a day. So after a couple of infractions, we actually decided it wasn't enough of a punishment, and we actually ended up upping it to over $200, and that actually left a mark for him. And once we did that and were able to hold him accountable on a daily basis, he never missed his target. Now, the third principle in generating this extra power is what I like to call righteous indignation. And at its core, it's all about using my frustration and anger and taking that and putting it to good use. And so what I'll do is I'll actually ask myself these questions until I'm legitimately fired up and I just get after it naturally. So some of those questions that I'll vary between are, what happens if nothing changes? Or what pisses me off about situation X? Or what breaks my heart about problem Z? I'll also ask myself, if not now, when am I going to do this? Or if I don't do this, then who is going to do it? And those emotions can be an incredibly powerful resource if we learn how to draw on them correctly. And I found that learning how to harness them and use them in a productive way to fuel our work is one of the common themes among top competitors and performers. Because when all else fails, honestly, this one doesn't. It burns like gasoline. It's hot, it's fast, but by the time the fuel runs out, I'm actually in the zone and my momentum is carrying me forward. And as an added bonus, sometimes music can be super powerful in channeling this as well. I say that because while I was preparing for this video, I was jamming out and really just getting into the groove while I had to write this. Now, the fourth trick in generating this momentum and power is often called habit stacking. This one is especially great if what you like to procrastinate on is a daily task, or if it's something that you want to develop the habit for. And how it's done is by always stacking the thing that you procrastinate with a cue of something else that you do every day. And I will actually combine this often with reinforcement as well. For example, when I was learning how to meditate, I knew it was something that was good for me and something that I had also had a little bit of past experience with, but it was still something that I didn't really enjoy the same way that I do now. So to get it going, I simply stacked it with my journaling and the reading habits, which I already loved at that time. And as a reward, I would also have a favorite drink to go with it. So I would actually take a sip of the drink, start the timer, and then sit with my thoughts for a while. Then when I was finished, I would actually polish off the drink and then finish with my reading. So that way I was able to sandwich it between those other two things that I already enjoyed. And so now those three of reading, meditating, and journaling happen every day together in the same order. Honestly, I don't remember the last day that I missed. And fifth on this list of what I like to use to generate this momentum and power is what I like to call my announcement. Now, I'm going to say this might sound a little dumb and even it's a little embarrassing, but it actually works for me. And so what I do is I take a deep breath, I let it out, and I'll simply say, turning pro in 3, 2, 1. And this phrase of turning pro is something that holds special meaning for me. It actually comes from Steven Pressfield's book, The War of Art. And anyone that has read that book knows that one of the things that defines a professional from an amateur, from Steven's perspective, is that they show up to work every day with that lunch pail, rain or shine, good health or bad mentality. Professionals tolerate no excuses, and they make it a point to be there to chip at their work with the best that they have available to them. And so this announcement and the countdown of turning pro in 3, 2, 1 is something that calls all of that to mind for me. And in my mind, I almost imagine like a rocket counting down for launch. And as I say it out loud, it has this effect of bringing out the maturity and the seasoned professional in me. And in my opinion, this is one of the primary examples and definitions of maturity. Just showing up and putting in your best available effort, no matter what. And when you do this, two things tend to happen. First, the feeling actually comes to you. After a few minutes of work, you actually start to get into the zone. Anyone who has ever had to do something consistently knows that you really don't always feel like doing that thing every day. But those that hold themselves as professionals know that if they sit down and do their work, the feeling will come. they will eventually get into the zone, and then the flow state will arrive as long as they keep hammering. And the second thing is something that I realized when I picked up Rory Vaden's book, Take the Stairs. In his book, Rory points out that on the plains of Kansas that lead up to the mountains of Colorado, you'll find both cows on the plains and buffalo in the foothills in the mountains. And when storms start to roll across the Rocky Mountains, these two animals react to storms very differently. The cows, they run away from the storm, but the storm still catches them and passes them over. And the cows will actually keep running away from the storm until the storm is just completely over and past them. And what this means is that the cows actually end up battling the storm for even longer than if they would have just stood still and waited it out. But on the other hand, when the buffalo sense an approaching storm, what they actually do is turn and face it and then charge through the storm. And as I'm sure you've realized, this has the exact opposite effect of what happens to the cows. They're able to meet the storm sooner and they spend far less time in it. So simply by just deciding to turn pro and doing that little countdown, I found that I spend way less time anxious waiting for the work to get done, and I get through the work faster, and I can actually start to enjoy the result of the work sooner. Now, these 5 are my favorite ways to generate power to overcome that desire to procrastinate, but they don't actually address the cause of the issue and don't cure the desire to procrastinate on their own. To actually get to the root of that obnoxious issue, we actually have to address those underlying emotional causes, the things that are making us turn to escape tactics like procrastination. And as I said earlier, procrastination is really just a symptom of that desire to escape or to avoid. And so in my experience, the battle of procrastination begins more in the mind than it does in the environment. So the fact that we have this desire to procrastinate is actually a consequence of how we perceive the circumstances of our lives. The good news, though, is that it can be completely addressed to a point where we either eliminate the desire to procrastinate altogether, or we can move through these next 4 steps so smoothly that there's no impact on our productivity. And trust me, that will have the greatest impact on our lives, way more than any environmental change we could ever hope to make. And those 4 steps are: first, identify, then we feel the feeling, then we accept it, and then we redefine it. So I'm going to hit these pretty quickly. Identify is actually pretty simple and straightforward. It's just recognizing the fact that we're trying to avoid something. We all have our favorite outlets. For me, it's social media, being in the gym, and occasionally a video game. But whenever I do those things and I'm doing it as an attempt to get away from something, the first thing that I have to do is I just have to recognize the fact that I'm running away from something. That's the simple part of step 1. It's pretty simple and easy. Now, the second step is you just feel that feeling. You want to process it. You don't want to act out of that feeling, but you do want to acknowledge the fact that you're afraid of something, that you're angry or frustrated, that you might feel some sort of resentment towards an outcome, or maybe even you feel like you're entitled to something that you shouldn't be doing. But you just want to identify and sit with those feelings. Here, honestly, journaling and meditation have been incredibly helpful for me. It just allows me to let those feelings play out and just acknowledge that they exist without having to act on it, right? Because then once we've identified and actually sat with those feelings, then we can just accept them naturally. We can say, okay, this is how I feel. There's nothing wrong with the way that I feel. It's just the way things are. But is it the only way to perceive things? And this is where that 4th step of redefining comes into play. Because let's be honest, as human beings, when we run into something that we don't like to do, we have those 2 natural instincts to either fight it or to run away from it. But what I found that helps me the most is I want to say, hey, are those the only 2 options for me to actually perceive this outcome or to perceive this task? Is there a 3rd or a 4th? And I guarantee you there always is. And as a fact, when I go through this process for myself, and I'm doing this in my journal, I force myself to come up with a minimum of 3. That way it's not just run away or fight, right? And the 3rd option sometimes people go with is do nothing, freeze. Don't do that either. Come up with a 4th or a 5th option as that's your first thing, because you always want to redefine these different emotions and these different things that we're going through. And here's the crazy thing is this will take time. This process of being able to move through these 4 steps on a quick basis is a practice. It takes time, it takes repetition. It's not a skill that we develop overnight. I know it wasn't for me. When I first came into this was when I was in door-to-door sales, and I would have people yell at me, get pissed off, cuss me out, call the cops on me, you name it, I've had it. And events really shook me at times, especially at the beginning. But as I learned to move through these 4 steps, I found that I was able to process it faster and faster as time went on. And then I was no longer having to sit down and perform some kind of breathing exercise to calm myself down. But then I was actually able to progress and just go on to the next door and shake it off faster and faster and faster, until eventually I was like, okay, yeah, they were pissed off at me. I don't really want to knock the next door, but I've got a responsibility and a job to do. But the fact is that was that one person. That was their feeling. That was what they went through with their life. I'm okay with it. That reflects on them, not on me. I can actually be a better person by going to the next door, serving them with this next service. And I would be able to process that so much faster as time went on. And again, just as an added bonus here, I can't stress just how valuable the processes of meditation and journaling have been for me. Because by removing that load a little bit each day, I found that I have less of a need to push myself in order to do my work. And I actually have more of a natural desire to do it. Then we actually begin to make things happen on a regular basis. And with that consistency, we start to see results that we can really be proud of. So again, the biggest tools in my tool belt that make this possible for me, again, are meditation and journaling. And if you would actually like to hear my full in-depth process on those, leave a comment down below. But until then, I hope you enjoy this next video.